Okay. Great, thank you. It's a pleasure to welcome you all here. I'm Mike Clouden, CEO of the Milken Institute. Yeah. I didn't know I had that many relatives. It's great. All right, good. All right, thank you. And I want to thank you all for braving morning traffic to get here. I understand some of you may even come from as far away as Beverly Hills and get Pasadena. Well, Pasadena, God, you must have started at 4 a.m. That's really great. So thank you all for coming here, although we know you're here because of this incredible program we have for you. Today's breakfast conversation between Governor Bill Richardson and Ambassador Charles Ries is the first of two sort of home and away events that the Milken Institute is doing in conjunction with RAND. It's been our pleasure to cooperate with RAND over the years with speakers. We haven't done something like this before. We are clearly the two leading think tanks in Santa Monica because we are, I think, the only two think tanks based in Santa Monica. I want to really take a special thanks here to welcome everybody who is here from RAND, as well as our Milken Institute Associates and young leaders who are here. Now, before I begin the introduction to our speakers today, let me just mention a couple of things. First, an invitation to the next RAND Milken Institute event. It's a conversation with Nobel Prize-winning economist Edmund Phelps about his new book, Mass Flourishing: How Grassroots Innovation Created Jobs, Challenge, and Change. The moderator will be our Peter Purcell, who is the former economic correspondent for the New York Times and the editor of the Milken Institute Review. We also have upcoming, excuse me, early in the morning, I can't talk. We also have coming up two events I want to mention. In New York, we are going to be having in just another 2 weeks our annual Partnering for Cures event. That is a gathering of some of the leading scientists, medical researchers in the country to talk about ways in which we can get treatments and cures to patients faster. It also acts as an investor conference where we bring together people who are seeking to find cures for diseases and new treatments, together with philanthropists and pharmaceutical companies, biotech firms, and disease groups to see if they can find ways of financing the breakthroughs they're trying to achieve. So any of you are interested in that, that's on our website. And also we have our annual California Summit we'll be holding November 21st, which this year is going to be a smaller event that we've done because we're trying to do something new. It'll be a private event where each of the groups will be focusing on a problem with the goal of publishing suggestions for change for the state. So that should be a very interesting thing coming up. Well, enough about that. Let's talk about what we're here for today. We have two veterans of global diplomacy who are going to share their insights and anecdotes from some of the toughest negotiations that Governor Richardson undertook in or out of office. In a distinguished career, Bill Richardson has been a 7-term congressman, a 2-term governor of New Mexico, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, and Secretary of Energy. For any of you who may have missed it, probably still online, one of the greatest, as far as I'm concerned, presidential commercials of all time, or adverts, political ads, when Governor Richardson was a candidate for the presidency, was him doing a job interview talking about why he wasn't experienced enough to be president. It was a wonderful ad. He's a five-time Nobel Peace Prize nominee, and for decades, Governor Richardson has been the man to turn to when diplomacy hasn't achieved results. He's won the release of hostages, American servicemen, and prisoners in North Korea, Iraq, Cuba, and Sudan. His new book, How to Sweet Talk a Shark, provides a candid glimpse into these experiences. And after we're all through, the book will be available for you to purchase, and Governor Richardson has kindly agreed to stay to sign copies. So we hope you'll be doing that. Now, interviewing Governor Richardson today is Ambassador Charles Ries. Charlie's the Vice President International at RAND. His 3 decades in the U.S. diplomatic service included the role of coordinator to economic transition in Iraq, ambassador to Greece, and Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs. It really is an honor for us to be able to host Governor Richardson and Ambassador Ries, and it's now my pleasure to turn the discussion over to them.
Thank you very much, Mike, and it's a great pleasure representing RAND to take part in this collaboration. We two think tanks in Santa Monica need to stick together, and it's two great research institutions, public policy institutions in any city, and so it's always been a great pleasure for us at RAND to collaborate with Milken. This is going to be fun. I mean, Governor Richardson, a great hero of mine, he's come to take on many of the toughest jobs in American diplomacy, and those of us who have also worked in these vineyards have enormous respect for what he's done. And we thought we'd have a conversation today. I'll start it out with a few stories and the derived negotiating principles, and then we'll get all of you involved as well. So, Governor, I'd like to start with the Hermit Kingdom, North Korea, Democratic People's Republic of Korea. You recently took the Eric Schmidt of Google to Korea, and I wonder if you could give us a little bit of a sense of how that visit went down. What were your objectives in doing the trip? What kind of obstacles did you find in doing that? And observations about the sort of North Koreans in general and how it is to work with them. You've done this now several times.
I want to thank you, and I want to thank RAND, and I want to thank the Milken Institute, Mike. That was a very gracious introduction. I noticed you spent about 2 seconds on my presidential race. That's about as long as it lasted anyway. I like to tell people that in that presidential race, despite that good ad, I had 2 problems in the Democratic primary. Obama and Clinton. Outside of that, it was. But North Korea, and I'm going to start by introducing the co-author of the book, Kevin Blyer, who worked for The Daily Show. I wanted to put a little humor in the book. Instead of, another political book about, I sat down and, we negotiated freedom for the world. This is a fun book where we're trying to talk about how negotiations with dictators apply to difficult people in all our lives, right? Spouses, wives, husbands, kids, negotiating for a car, a loan, etc. So I'd just like to give credit. Actually, he wrote the damn book. I didn't do a thing. Stand up, Kevin.
I am standing.
Oh, thank you. Stand up. Oh, you were standing?
I am standing.
Of course, The Daily Show is the leading source of accurate news in America.
Right. So. North Korea, it's a time warp. It's a cult of personality. The ruling family, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and now Kim Jong-un, who's 30 years old, nobody knows anything about it except that he likes Dennis Rodman. You go in there, and I've been there 8 times. And people say, well, you've been there 8 times. What's going on? And the answer is, I don't know right now. It's a situation where this young man, we think, is being manipulated by some of the harder line elements in the military and the Communist Party. We don't think he's going in the right direction. But at the same time, he makes some moves that suggest, well, maybe he wants to engage. They open up the Kaesong facility, which is a joint operation on the border where there are North Koreans and South Koreans working together. They reactivate the talks with South Korea on family issues, and then they detonate a nuclear weapon. So they're so inconsistent. Now, when Kevin and I and Eric Schmidt went, we had 3 objectives. One, there was an American detainee, Kenneth Bay, who's still there, a poor guy that's hurting, his American missionary. He should be allowed out, but the North Koreans use these prisoners as political chits. Okay, you send Bill Clinton, we'll let him out. Or you send Jimmy Carter. I used to be sent over and I'd get some out, but they've increased their value. But Kevin and I, and so the second objective was, look, North Koreans, stop detonating these weapons. Don't you want to, why are you doing all this crazy stuff? What are you up to? And the objective there was to see Kim Jong-un, but he wouldn't see us. And I had Eric Schmidt. I had, you know, I'd been there 7 times. I thought they'd see us. 2 weeks later, he meets with Dennis Rodman. And they talk about, I don't know what they talked about, but they were photographed together. The third objective was Eric Schmidt and Google. And our thought was that the internet, maybe if we're convincing them that they start using the internet, like in the Arab Spring, somehow information flows, because the limited is very tightly controlled there, just by the leadership. And when we went there, Eric Schmidt was the star. I mean, the leaders of North Korea, the students, software engineers, we went to this university. Everyone crowded around him. I was chopped liver. They didn't care about me, but they were fascinated by Google and what they knew exactly who he was. And it was like a thirst for this initiative. Anyway, you know, I've rambled, but my point is that in my view, policy-wise, and I know the Milken Institute and RAND, you know, you're looking at the future, I think it makes sense for us to engage North Korea. That doesn't mean by meeting with them we're giving them anything. But I think to continuously isolate them, to put more sanctions on, you can't put any more sanctions on them. They don't have any more sanctions to put on. That I think it's important that we try to convince this new leader that proceeding with enriched uranium and nuclear weapons, they have 6 or 7, isn't the right course of action. They have incredible missile power, maybe not enough to reach us, but they're developing that missile technology, 1.5 million men in arms. We have 28,000 American troops on the DMZ. We have a treaty with our friends, the South Koreans. I think it's better to like cool things down. And then, I don't know if we want to get into this, but China, we always say, well, China can pressure them. China can take care of that. Well, you know, North Koreans are pretty independent. And then the second question is, and I know we've got a lot of Asian experts here, why would China want to help us in that region? So why are they going to do anything to curb the North Koreans? I've rambled too long.
Well, just before we leave North Korea, you tried, and you describe in the book, a number of techniques to try and get to Kim Jong-un. And they were stalling you. You were, you know, trying to get the foreign minister to help. Can you give us a sense of how you tried that, even if it didn't work that time? It's worked in the past.
Yeah. Well, the North Koreans, they're different. They don't think like we do. They don't think like other countries. Like in a negotiation, it's basically, okay, you're going to do this, we're going to do that. The North Koreans don't think that way. They think they are so right that the only concession they make is they'll give you a little more time to reach their conclusion. That's their idea. And when they're so cult of personality, you know, the dear leader has said I should take this position, they're not going to change. With the North Koreans, the first time, there were a couple of American servicemen. When I first got into sort of the hostage business, I was a member of Congress. I'd gone in the Intelligence Committee. I was allowed to go into North Korea, one of the first in the mid-90s. And then 2 American helicopter pilots got shot down. So Secretary Christopher, every time I go through the big law firms here, I think I am. Was he Manat or? Okay, I should be careful, no? By the way, Araceli Ruano is my colleague from Vice President Gore. She's a wonderful young lady. Please give her a nice hand. So one of the techniques, and we were talking about this in the other room, is with the North Koreans, when you negotiate, physical tiredness is important. You want to get the other side, and they try to get me to be tired, to make mistakes, to want to leave. And with the North Koreans, a technique that I used when I first went there was I told the North Koreans, unless I got the 2 pilots out, I wasn't going to leave. And that was enough to get them to give me. So that was a technique with them. I think, Ambassador, another technique that I always use is you got to respect the other side. You got to connect with them personally. You can't go in and read the State Department talking points. You are a bad dictator. You violate human rights. Stop doing it. Not if you want something from them. And I think you culturally have to relate. When I talk to Fidel Castro or Hugo Chavez, you talk baseball, you talk in Spanish. You use humor. I mean, there have been times when I've used humor and it helps. With dictators that are known for violating human rights, you know, a couple of times I'd say, all right, so where are the dungeons? Where do you cut the fingernails off of some of your people? And they look at you. They don't know whether to kill you or they laugh. Luckily, they laughed. But you set a tone. You cool them down. Because then you got to realize when you're negotiating with a dictator, with a bad person, they don't have to go to Congress. They don't have to worry about shutdowns. They can just decide and you get your objective. So humor, you set a deadline, you find ways to, you got to know where you want to end up. And maybe ending up, and you've been very good at this too, the next meeting is where you want to end up. You don't want to end it and go home. You want to keep going. You want to keep talking. As I mentioned, setting a day, get them in a locale. I always conceded the turf. Okay, the North Koreans want this. I'll go to North Korea. We don't have to do it in Santa Monica. I'll go there. The Cubans want this. The Sudanese, the president of the Sudan wants this. I mean, my last humor issue involved a journalist, and this was in the Sudan. His name was Salopek, Chicago Tribune. About 5 years ago, I was governor of New Mexico. And I was asked to try to get this guy released. He'd been in prison in the Sudan about 6 months. He had 2 black Malians with him that carried his equipment, 2 African, big, tall guys. They were all locked in a prison in southern Sudan. And nobody could get him out. The State Department, you know, Jimmy Carter, even President Obama, when he was a senator, had gone and tried to get him out. So I was asked to go because I had known this dictator from the Sudan. His name is Bashir. If you look at the list of the world's worst dictators, Parade magazine, Bashir always beats everybody.
On the bucket list of dictators, he's up there, huh?
Yeah, he's and you know, President Clinton used to say, you know, Sudan, North Korea, send Richardson. Bad people like him. So with the Sudanese president, I went to see him. And 12 years before I'd gotten am I talking too much?
No, go for it. Absolutely.
Okay. I'd gotten 3 Red Cross workers out, international, not American. And when I'd left 12 years before, I actually said, I want to thank the president for his humanitarian gesture. And I think no American had ever said a nice thing about him. And he remembered that when I went back and said, would you please give me this journalist? You've had him for, and he says, what do I get out of it? I said, you don't get anything out of it. You'll get some good press, one day a good press. That's all you're going to get. Will the U.S. appreciate it? I said, probably not, you know, but I will. He said, yeah, well, that helps me. I said, well, Mr. President, please, let me take this guy home. I have his wife with me, and his wife, I summoned her, and I had given her instructions. I said, when you were talking to Bashir, I just want you to do one thing. I said to her, she was a very accomplished woman. You know, in this era of women's liberation, you have to be careful what you say to women. And I said, but I have one thing I want you to do, because we want to get your husband out. When I signal, I want you to start crying. That didn't go over well here. Anyway, because I wanted Bashir to see the humanity, you know, I kept talking, and I'd look at her, she wouldn't cry, and I think, she finally did. But, you know, Bashir then said to me, okay, Salopek, you were a gentleman when you left 12 years ago. I'm going to let you take Salopek, but you got to go get him. You know, Sudan's pretty big. If you go to southern Sudan, it's about 2,000 miles away. And I said, well, can you bring him? Can you fly him up here? No, you go get him. Okay. But, he said, the 2 black men, the Malians, they stay. They're enemies of the state. We're at war with them. We're not going to let them go. I said, Mr. President, I can't leave without the three of them. I've come for the three of them, although I had just emphasized Salopek. And he said, no, take it or leave it. So I had to make a very quick decision. What do I do? Do I leave with just Salopek and leave the two Malians behind? So I said, I'm going to roll the dice. I said, Mr. President, you're a politician, and I'm a politician. In fact, I said, Mr. President, I'm thinking of running for president. There's an AP reporter there, and he says to me, yeah, I hear you may run. I'd like to be supportive. I said, don't overdo it here. This woman, then later wrote something that didn't help me, about that conversation. I said, yeah, that's okay. And I said, well, you had an election. He said, yeah, my last election, I got 96%. This is Bashir. I said, yeah. I said, was your opponent alive? Again, he kind of winced, but I said, Mr. President, I have to take all three. How does it look for me, a politician, to take the white guy out and leave the two black guys behind? I rolled the dice. He looked at me, and I didn't know what he was going to do. But he stood up and he burst out laughing. And he laughed and laughed, and he went around and told his cabinet members that were nearby, come here. And he was telling them the story. He says, okay, get him out of here. And we succeeded.
It's a great story. It's a great story. Talking about cults of personality, tell me about Hugo Chavez and your relationship. You had various times with Hugo, now the late Hugo Chavez. One of which when you were trying to get these guys that were taken by the FARC in Colombia.
I'm a baseball fan. By the way, how are the Dodgers doing? Oh, I'm kidding. I'm a Red Sox fan. Although I really wanted a Red Sox-Dodgers series fan. You guys got our, Adrian Gonzalez, but I like the Dodgers. Chavez knew baseball. I loved baseball. When I first was Secretary of Energy, he was elected president, and I went to his inauguration. He first of all got mad because Clinton or Gore didn't go, and they sent the Secretary of Energy, me. But he then got a little happy because I bought him a beautiful baseball glove. Remember Rawlings? They made the best gloves, gleaming yellow. They're all Japanese now. They're all black and red, but in those days, and he loved it. He remembered that. And so this next time I went to see him, the objective was to have him help with the FARC. And he, of course, denied that he knew the FARC. So we opened the meeting, and I said, Mr. President, I'm here to ask you for help with these three Americans. They're in the Colombian jungle. Would you please, help, just give me some information. Get me a meeting with the FARC. He said, well, what makes you think I know him? I don't know him. What do you think, I'm a terrorist? I think you probably know them, but help me. And he said, well, all right, let's talk. And so he starts venting about the administration, Obama, and venting about Bush. And I said, okay, well, Mr. President, I have a little gift for you. So I pulled out of my pocket a baseball, signed by three great American players. And I had paid for this myself. It was expensive. But these memorabilia, I think they're here in Los Angeles, memorabilia, signed by Mickey Mantle, Duke Snider, and Willie Mays in one ball. And it was authenticated because I said, nobody's going to sign these three in one ball. And so I said, I'm going to give you this. And he looks at it. And he says, you know something? This is not right. I said, why is that? He says, Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays, great players. But Duke Snider was only a good player. He said that. So what are you trying to tell me? I said, I'm just giving you a gift, for God's sake. And so he cooled down, and we started back and forth. And then he says, all right, I'll help you with the FARC. I'll help you. That's it. But he says, you know what? And you know, Latins and Cubans, I don't know, Ambassador, I don't know if you served in Latin America.
Dominican Republic.
But they don't say, you know, Governor Richardson, Secretary, they say, Richardson. The Cubans, oye, mira Richardson, vamos a hacer esto. And he said to me, ¿y qué le digo a la FARC cuando me preguntan qué le voy a dar yo? In other words, what am I going to tell the FARC when they say, well, what do we get if we get these prisoners out? And I said, well, I don't have a thing. He says, ¿qué? ¿Les doy una pelota de béisbol? Will they take the baby? And so, you know, Chavez he had a great gift for dealing with his people. You know, I don't condone his anti-democratic moves, and you know, but I think that personal relationship. One time in the campaign trail in Iowa's a really liberal state, and they asked Hugo Chavez, "Why do you have such a bad relationship with the U.S.?" He says, "Well, I don't know, but there are two Americans that I really like. One is there was a former, and the second is Bill Richardson in Iowa." That actually helped me a little bit. I was third. I was fourth.
I want to come to that campaign in a minute, but I can't, having served in Baghdad, spending a lot of my life negotiating with the Iraqis. I just have enormous admiration for your negotiation with Saddam. I wonder if you could tell us the story of negotiating with Saddam.
Well, this was over 2 American contractors that had strayed into Iraq. I don't think they had strayed. I think they were in Kuwait, and they'd had too much to drink, and they took the wrong turn, and they ended up in an Iraqi prison. And you know, the wives were, it was a big international campaign. Jesse Jackson, everyone was trying to get them out, the State Department. And so the administration turned to me. They said, you know, we hear that they may want to talk to you, but we want to make things clear. He said, if you go and get them out, we're going to take a little credit that we sent you. But if you fail, we don't know you. I mean, the administration was very clear, National Security Advisor. Those were and sometimes when you're a negotiator, you want something, you want clarity. You know, if you screw up, you know, you're on your own. If you do well, you share the credit. That's another element of negotiation. Back and forth, I end up meeting with Saddam Hussein. I make a terrible mistake right away. I'm tired. This is another tactic. Get them when they're tired. Well, he got me when I was tired. I'd arrived in Baghdad. I'd been, the way you get there, as you know, is through Jordan, that highway in Jordan, 100 miles an hour. And I crossed my leg. We were like this. And I showed him the sole of my shoe, which to an Arab is a supreme insult. And I had my briefing books from the State Department. Do not cross your legs and show him the dirty side of your shoe. But I was so tired, and we're talking, and then all of a sudden, he walks out. He walks out of the meeting. And I'm with my interpreter, and I say, am I toast? What's going on? Why did he leave? You insulted the president. You shouldn't have crossed your legs and showed him your shoe. You must apologize. Well, I said, is he coming back? He said, yeah, he's coming back. Then I knew that something was up, that he was trying to get a little corner on me. He came back. And there were a bunch of Revolutionary Guards around us. And he was a big guy. He's a tall, thin guy. He had guns, knives, all kinds of, you know, he had these beady little eyes, and he'd look at me. He came back, and I think he expected me to apologize, to grovel. Oh, Mr. President, I'm a cretin. I'm so sorry. I didn't. I said, you know, there's something up here. I'm just going to be respectful. I'm going to say to him what my objective is, but I'm not going to apologize. And he kept, I think, waiting for me to apologize. But then I saw him nodding a little bit, and I said, well, maybe that's good. Maybe I've broken through. Then all of a sudden, he picks up a piece of paper and he says, by virtue, he wouldn't look at me, by virtue of the authority, Constitution 3B in Iraq, I hereby turn over the 2 Americans to you. And I'm like almost ecstatic, and I move over and I grab his hand. The Revolutionary Guard swept on us, thinking that I was going to try to do some bodily harm. It was just a gesture. And he says, okay, well, I'm going to release it. I'm going to call in the media. I mean, he had, I think, decided to turn him over. But you never know. He might have changed his mind. So we stand up. The media comes in. And he says to me, very serious, we're going to be photographed all over Iraq. And I want you to know that being photographed with you is not helpful to me as the leader of Iraq. And I said, well, Mr. President, you know, the photo with you in the United States is not helping me either. So he looks, and there's like a little smile, and the media snaps their pictures, and, you know, we have the 2 Americans. And then he says, well, wait, you can't leave yet. I said, well, and one of the things you learn when you're with a dictator, when you get what you want, get out. Because they change their mind, or there's press, or, you know, something happens. There's always something. So I said, no, I have to, Mr. President, I have to leave. I have votes in the Congress. If he had checked, we were on recess. I had no votes. And no, he says, I understand that you're a Catholic, and you would ask to go to a service, and I had, in Baghdad. He says, well, Tariq Asif's wife is a Chaldean Catholic, and there's a church there, and she'll take you to church. I said, no, I got to leave. No, you're going to go to church. I said, okay. So he then said to me, all right, now, when you go to church, don't go to confession. Because if you go to confession, then you will be late for your votes. And the idea was, I'll explain it to you. Don't you all get it? Anyway, that I was going to stay in confession a long time. And then another smile. And then I knew we had, for this brief time, 2 enemies sort of connected. And I went and I took these 2 guys out. But that was my experience with him. And, you know, it was like, in a brief period of time, establishing a personal connection.
Great story. Great story. Let me, just one more thing. You start the book, almost start the book with a discussion of your campaign for the presidency in 2008. With a tale of, and also come back to it at the end, with a tale about how the Clintons and President Obama were negotiating with you for your endorsement after you withdrew. I wonder if you could tell some highlights from that story. It's 2 chapters plus, and also don't forget the Katrina moment, which just floored me.
Well, as I said, my campaign for president was very brief. I knew right away that, you know, I wasn't going to make it. In fact, there was one speech before the Iowa caucus that Obama made. I was sitting with my wife. I said, you know, we should just endorse Obama right now. And she said, no, you're still running. Yeah. Anyway, but because it was such a compelling speech. And then I knew, you know, you have moments when you know something's not going to work or it's going to work. Well, I said, you know, this thing is over. So the only remembrance right now people have of my campaign, because I'd end up being 3rd, 4th. By the way, Joe Biden doesn't like this, but I always got more votes than him. He's vice president. Was my endorsement of Obama over Hillary. And it was a very tough decision for me, one that still has repercussions. Bill Clinton doesn't talk to me. He has not forgiven me. He used to tell people, 2 people I'll never forgive her, Ted Kennedy and Bill Richardson. Ted's gone, so there's the only one left. And it was a painful moment, and it was, in the book I say, there was a mistake I made in that. I mean, it wasn't the issue of loyalty. I always said to everyone, I would endorse Bill if he were running. Hillary, you know, she was First Lady, I knew her, But I was a candidate myself. And there was something very special about Obama that I saw on the campaign trail. And the ambassador mentioned, you know, an incident in a debate that was important to me. And the mistake I made was the president wanted to come see me to get my endorsement of Hillary, but he wanted to do it in a very public way. He wanted to come to Santa Fe to the Super Bowl. We were watching, the Super Bowl was coming up. And he wanted to bring a bunch of media, and I think what he wanted was at halftime for me to, oh, well, President Clinton's got me to endorse Mrs. Clinton. And I wasn't ready. But the mistake I made was I shouldn't have allowed the event to happen. I should have said, let's just wait. But, you know, I couldn't resist. How can you resist Bill Clinton, the best negotiator of all time, in my judgment, and my friend? And so I didn't do the endorsement. I waited, and then I said, you know, there's something about Obama. I don't know what it is, but it's good that and Obama would, you know, Hillary would send messengers to talk to me. You know, Ambassador so-and-so, Haim Sabbam, all these people, will you endorse Hillary? She'd call too. Obama would always call me himself on his cell. Hey, Brother Richardson, and said, Obama. He says, you like saying that, don't you? I said, yeah, I do. He says, you know, I can't compete with a Super Bowl. You know, I saw all that. And, am I out? I said, no, just let's keep going. But I had remembered one time in the campaign trail. You remember those debates. You watch them all. This last one was the Republican debates because there weren't any Democrat. But in the Democratic debates, you know, we had endless number of debates. And the problem for candidates like me is no one asks us questions. It's either Obama or Clinton at the time, John Edwards. So, you know, I was aching at one of the debates for somebody to ask me something. Now, in the debates in the lineup, they line up all the candidates, and they always somehow used to have me next to Obama. I guess they put the minorities on the side, you know, the Hispanic and the black and all the other. But I'd end up like talking to him, and the MC would be, okay, Senator Clinton, what's your position? I'd be talking to Obama, you know, gossiping. Where are you going next? And he'd say, no, I don't know where I'm going. Then all of a sudden, Governor Richardson, what's your position on? And I was talking to Obama. I wasn't listening. My big chance. And they say, I think it was Wolf Blitzer. Who was it? Was it? And I was almost going to say, repeat the question. It was so obvious that I wasn't listening. And Obama says, they asked you about Katrina. They asked you about Katrina. So I said, well, my policy on Katrina is. He could have thrown me under the bus, and he didn't. So that, not that that sealed it, but I liked that he did that. I was going down anyway. But, you know, but that, anyway, that chapter, you know, in politics, sometimes you make mistakes. In negotiating, I think, Kevin, we wrote several successful negotiations, but there's some that we failed. And I think I failed in that, the way I handled the Clinton Super Bowl issue. And then there's another one on Cuba where I got mad at the Cubans. It was over this hostage named Alan Gross. And I tried to get him out, and we had a package. And I thought we had a deal, and the Cubans said, no, you're not only not going to see Alan Gross, you're not going to get him, but we want you to leave town. I said, that's very polite, thank you. I got mad, and instead of, some of you have been to Cuba, the Hotel Nacional. I should have gone to my room, taken a right, but instead I went straight into television cameras. You know, politicians can't resist that sometimes. And I said, the Cubans have a hostage. They didn't turn him over. And I'm not going to leave until I see Alan Gross. Well, 4 days later, I left without Alan Gross.
He's still there.
And it was a mistake, and he's still there. I mean, others have tried, but, you know, use the meat. Don't pressure. Don't make the other side look bad. Don't move people in a direction where they become intractable. That's another tip. but that's in the book.
I think that's what makes the book a lot of fun, is that you discuss, they're not all success stories. There are a lot of them there, and you always draw out these lessons. Let me stop here and invite questions from the audience, because I know I could have fun for another 4 or 5 hours on these stories. But right there in the back. Wait for the microphone, please. There you go.
You made a reference to your translator when you were negotiating with Saddam. Could you talk a little bit about the art of dealing with translators and how you handle that interface?
Well, usually the translators in these situations are part of the team of the other side. You have to understand that they're going to twist things not in your favor, twist interpretations. Like he was telling me, you got to apologize. This was a translator. I remember a little guy's about this tall. I almost smacked him. But he said, in very excellent English, you must apologize. And so you have to be careful about the exact translations. In another case, in the Sudan, what helped me get Selipik, the journalist, out, was that the translator at the time of my first meeting with Bashir 12 years later was the now he was Sudan's ambassador to the United States, who helped me as an interlocutor pave the way for the negotiation. But you have to assume that the translator is not on your side. Now, you know, in Africa, when you can speak English, I speak a little French, but not good enough to negotiate in Africa. So you just have to see that the translator is not on your side. This is why direct language with Castro, with Cuba, the Cubans, and with Hugo Chavez, we talked in Spanish. And I tell young people, anybody that has diversity in their veins, another language, another nation, you have an advantage in appreciating other cultures and other points of view. So take advantage of that. If you're, you know, part Hispanic or Asian, you don't have to stick to domestic issues. Do international issues. Join the Foreign Service, the Intelligence Service. I talked to some students yesterday, and I think that's an asset, having that bicultural background.
Good advice. Yeah, no, absolutely. Back here.
Iran, Iran, and Iran.
Well, here's my thought. Everybody will give you, one of the things you learn in politics is some issues don't have a solution. Nobody will admit it. I'm not sure this one does, but what every politician will tell you is on Iran, not everyone, we must test them, but don't believe them until something concrete. My answer there is, with this new president, Rouhani, what he has said and done so far, I like. What you have to watch is what the clerics do if they think this man has gone too far. Like, I think they feel he went too far in accepting Obama's call, so they yanked him back. I do think there's a possibility, you know why? Not because they suddenly love America or there's great ferment in Iran to better relations with America. I think it's growing. But because we were squeezing Iran with sanctions, we and the Europeans and the Asians, Iraq now imports half of their food, half of their gasoline. Their oil production has gone down in half, from 2 million barrels to 1 million. Their oil sanctions, huge inflation. So I think they made a decision, well, maybe if we make a deal on enriched uranium, we can lessen the sanctions. So they let this president start negotiations. The issue is going to be, and what we need, and what Israel needs, and the internet, is for them not to have any nuclear weapons. If that enriched uranium, which is going to be very difficult, is at a certain grade that does not move towards nuclear weapons, is used for nuclear power or peaceful uses or whatever, then maybe there's a deal. I think we have to test them. In the end, I'm not on the optimist side, and I worry about Israel. You know, I just think somebody asked me, well, Netanyahu doesn't believe in it. I said, you know, Netanyahu's got to protect this country. You know, right now, if I'm in the Israeli government, I see Hamas on one side, Hezbollah on the other side. I see Iran mucking around everywhere. I see Egypt, that's the guarantor of the Israel-Egypt treaty. We don't know if they're on our side. There's chaos. There's chaos in Syria. So if I'm Israel, I'm a little worried about the neighborhood. So I think we got to work very closely with them on this issue. But I must say, as I saw Rouhani at the UN, the things he said, so far there were some negotiations in Geneva, weren't there, Ambassador?
Well, there was discussions. There were
Discussions
about. Yeah.
I mean, I think they're. Let's see how far it goes.
Yeah. Let me try over here, and then I'll come back over here. Stand by for the microphone.
Your negotiations are very much in the public eye. How do you balance being open with the public with what's going on versus wanting to do these negotiations in private?
Good question.
You know, I know I'm going to tick off some people here when I say this. I think that this guy from WikiLeaks and Stone, they're not good people. What they've done, you know, they're heroes. Oh, you know, for a negotiator, for somebody working for the U.S. government trying to protect Americans in negotiations, you know, to spill everything you've done out in the public when your other side thinks it's classified, and for our own reasons we classify them, I don't think is right. Now, that doesn't answer your question, but I am an advocate. You know, some of these you got to be careful whether you go public with them. A lot of these discussions that I've had, I try to keep private. And one thing is you have to trust each other. If I tell, you know, Bashir, hey, you know, I'm not going to say anything I'm going to tell you that I will say that you did the right thing in giving me this, because there's always press there. But I'm not going to detail the back and forth of what you said to me, and then I'll say to Bashir, by the way, that endorsement you want to give me, you don't really have to do it. He did it, you know, it didn't help me. But so that's the balance. Now, I know the National Security Agency and the CIA, they're taking a lot of hits. I was on, I don't know if you saw, last night I was on O'Reilly. He eviscerated me. I mean, the guy is a good interviewer. I mean, he punches you, and then he doesn't let you answer, which is a very good negotiating technique. And, you know, he dominates the airwaves, so you can't do much. But he asked me, I think it was him or Blitzer, he asked me, well, what about the Germans? You know, they're now, Mrs. Merkel says that we got her cell phone number, and we're listening to her. Well, the White House chief of staff, the spokesman, said that we weren't, that we don't listen to her. I mean, I'd like to believe the White House. When I was in the government, they never asked me for cell phone numbers of leaders, the NSA. But I will tell you something about the NSA, National Security. I know maybe they went a little too far in some of the calls that go overseas, you know, and there, I think a FISA court, judges should determine whether, okay, can we tap this phone number of Mrs. You know, Jackson in Los Angeles who's talking too much to this guy in Yemen? Let a court decide whether that needs to happen. I think that's a good standard. But I'll tell you, the intel that we get from CIA, NSA is valuable to a policymaker that's negotiating to do certain things. What they tell you, and I'm not going to, you know, get into that, but helps. And in the book, there's an incident, and this does not involve the intelligence agencies. This is not this was intel that the mission picked up. There used to be some votes in the Security Council that were important to us. They were over Iraq, but there are 5 members of the Security Council, but there are 10 other countries that are represented in the Security Council that don't have veto power. But you got to get a majority of votes to get what you want. And there was one particular ambassador that was so good, and he was always out to screw me. Like he knew parliamentary stuff, he'd postpone. But I found out, it's in the book, so it's public, he had a weakness: women. He had mistresses. So sometimes I would schedule votes when I knew he wouldn't be around. And, you know, and we succeeded. This is not NSA stuff, but this was intel. But my point is that these, you know, give a break to our people at the end. There's about 1,000, they got thousands of people out there, CIA. These are tough jobs. And so let's not eviscerate, you know, the service they provide.
I might add to that, WikiLeaks put out in their 250,000 cables, 1,000 that were written by me.
I mean, that's not right.
You know,
in confidence. You did
right.
that in confidence.
With ministers and people I saw, absolutely. No, I felt terrible about it. So I know what you mean. Well, over here, we did. Oh, okay, right here in the middle. Thanks.
Thank you both very much. It's been terrific. And I'm curious, you're dealing with men that many, if not most, would consider evil, and your goals are good, and you accomplished quite a few of them. But as you're sharing stories and jokes and gifts with these men and laughter and whatnot, whatever happens, I mean, is there an inner conflict that goes on? You're sitting there with some son of a bitch that you know actually does have dungeons and does have people put to death. Is that an issue for you as you're in those meetings?
No. Of course I think about it. And, you know, I'll even go a step further. Sometimes my government would want me to say what you just said to them. And I wouldn't do it because my objective was very narrow. And my objective was to get a human being out of jail, a political prisoner, or to get maybe a ceasefire with the Taliban. I mean, I was negotiating with the Taliban at the time that they had bin Laden, before he bombed the African embassies. My point is that I think there is a service to be made by what is called out-of-the-box diplomacy. You know, we have outstanding ambassadors like the ambassador who do negotiating career that, you know, are great. But I think there's sometimes instances where a UN envoy or another country, in this case the Oslo Accords, the Norwegians, or you know, a sports diplomat. I'll tell you another story about the North Koreans. They always asked me, they were fascinated by Michael Jordan. They wanted me to bring him, you know, the basketball player. And I said, well, you know, first of all, he doesn't know me. I'm not going to. But it never happened. My point is that I think if you are trying to get an objective, and with the Taliban it was a ceasefire, with Bashir is getting human beings out of journalists. You have to achieve your goal, you have to establish that personal connection. And that's what I did. And, you know, there were times when people would say that. My wife would say, Jesus, why did you say that thing about Bashir? He's like, look at Parade magazine. He's killed thousands of people. I said, well, you had to get Salopek out. What'd you expect? So that comes into your mind, but I decided early on that this is something, maybe it was a role that I had or keep having. And Jesse Jackson does this well. Jimmy Carter does this well. You know, in his own, he's a former president, so he has that stature. And there are others that do this, that are around that you don't hear about, that have great success. There's one person that has had great success with the pirates, the Somalians. They always call on this person. So, Kevin, do you want to add?
I think you covered the waterfront.
Who asked you anyway?
Over here. Coming. The microphone's coming.
So you've commented about how unpredictable or how much these people you're dealing with sort of go to their own rules. On a personal level, when you go over on one of these negotiations, and Eric Schmidt, for example, goes with you, is there any kind of personal concern if they're going to hold as a hostage a journalist, why not Eric Schmidt?
Yeah. Well, I said to Eric, well, you know, it's a good thing that you got Google behind you. No, I didn't say that. But yeah, you know, you got to be, you have to be careful. You know, when you go into North Korea, first of all, they take all your computers away. They take all your cell phones, and they probably are encrypting them. You know, they know everything about us, probably. So even Eric, when we gave that presentation to the university, they did let him take his Google computer, didn't they?
Correct. He had one laptop.
He had one laptop.
But his wife cleaned before and after.
Yeah.
Good thinking.
And by the way, you know, with Eric, when we went there, Eric called me a week before we went. He says, you know, I thought a nice thing to do would be, he says, we have these, Google has these computers of maps of everything under the sun. He says, we just finished one on North Korea. What if what if we release that before our visit? I said, Eric, forget about that. We waited until after we got back, but you know what his map had? He had where the gulags were. And so I said to Eric, good thing we didn't release this before, or you would have been there with Kenneth Bay. Sometimes there's a concern, but you also have to put yourself in their shoes. Are they going to take me and Schmidt? I mean, this would be a big, for them, a big diplomatic, I won't say disaster, but they're really taking a chance. So you have to, you take it into account. And there were times when I was in Africa in a rebel camp where these little kids running around, 11 years old with AK-47s, no shirts. And and I said, geez, don't point that at me. Where you worry a little bit about, are you going to come back? Maybe you'll be the next hostage. But you just have to get beyond that and do your job and try to, in a short period of time, get what you want.
You told us, follow on that, you told the story about, in the book, about that sort of wacky Darfur leader who, was hyperactive and couldn't really focus. Maybe you might mention that, about what it was like dealing with him, because he was probably, wasn't even a national leader that you were dealing with.
This guy's name was Cherubino Bol, B-O-L. He was a rebel within Sudan. He was basically a warlord who ruled by intimidation, and he'd take over villages, and that would be his source of power. He was a military power. He wasn't for the government. He was, on each side, whoever would buy him out. In those days in the Sudan, there was Bashir, and there was like a rebel named John Garang, who later was killed. And Cherubino would play both of them. Anyway, Cherubino had these 3 hostages from the Red Cross. A Kenyan, a Pakistani, and a Brit. And these Red Cross workers, he captured them, and he wouldn't let them go. The International Red Cross tried to get them out. U.S. government, Kenyan government. Cherubino wanted $10 million. He said, for $10 million, I'll let him out. I went there. I remember the Red Cross, I went to Geneva to get briefed by the Red Cross. And they said, look, we've tried everything. You're not going to get them out. What makes you think you're going to get them out? They were like a little haughty. We can't get them out. But, we're working negotiations. And that's another thing when official sources, when, somebody like me comes in, they try to, just let us handle it. We're professionals. We know what we're doing. Yeah, well, these guys have been there a year, and they're not doing well. So I went straight to the camp. I knew it was a gamble. The Red Cross did give me one of those C-130s, those old C. We landed there, and I started negotiating with Cherubino. I said, look, my standard plea, you've got these 3 workers. What are you going to get out of this? You've already gotten bad press. Nobody likes you anyway. Then he had big, bushy, he had his, all his weapons, and he's a guerrilla. And he said, well, I want $10 million. I said, well, you're not going to get $10 million. All right. Then right away, he says, all right, I'll take 5. Then I knew he wanted a deal. Because no one knew whether he wanted a deal because nobody could get to him. Well, I said, no, okay, so let's start talking. Yeah. He said, I'm hungry. Do you have some food? And he goes back and forth. And, you know, they bring this dead goat with little hairs on it. And, you know, and I've noticed his eating. He says, eat, eat, eat. I ate it. I didn't know what was going to happen to me. So it was an outdoor pavilion, and we were eating and talking, and you know, we go back and forth. And I said, look, let's get these people out. Come on. What do you need? What do you want? $5 million. I said, that's not going to happen. I'm not going to give you that, and I'm going to leave. I got to leave tonight because I didn't say I have votes, but I'm leaving. So we went back and forth. And I said, well, give me a tour of the camp. And so we take a tour of his camp. And then Carabino says, I got to go make a call. The man giving me the tour of the camp said, you know, I was a congressman then. It was a little hut, a medical hut. He says, Carabino's daughter, she's 3. She died 3 days ago. I said, she died? What happened? He says, we have no medicine. We have no treatment. We have no doctors. And there are a lot of other children that are very sick. I think he was telling me something. I said, okay. So we go back, we resume the negotiations. We go back and forth. I had the American ambassador there with me, Tim. I think he went to Iraq after, not as ambassador, but
Tim Carney.
Tim Carney.
Tim Carney, great guy.
And he was there with me. I said, look, I got the American ambassador here. The U.S. will like what you did. Carney, you know, he's the ambassador. And, you know, you may need a visa. We'd never probably give this poor guy a visa. But so I threw that out. And he says, oh, I've never been to America. I said, well, I'm going to be gone by the time you apply. I thought in my mind. So we keep talking, and we go back. I said, you're not going to get any money, but I tell you what I'll give you. I'll bring some doctors here. I'll bring some medicine. We'll do a survey. All these kids, I bet you they've got pandemic diseases, and you can't allow that for your people. And for the first time, you know, all this chatter about his weapons and his power, he kind of nodded a little. I could see his eyebrow. He had these big eyebrows. They'd go back up and down. I said, you know, why don't we do that? And he says, no, $1 million. You've convinced me. I said, no, I'm not going to give you. I don't have $1 million. All of a sudden, I look to my left, and there's the one vehicle that he had, a Jeep. And I look over and I said, and I knew that the Red Cross had lots of Jeeps, the internet. I said, okay. All of the medical equipment, the doctors, and I'll get you a Jeep. One more Jeep. And I pulled that out of my hat. I hadn't told the Red Cross they had to do this. And he said, it was getting late. I said, I'm leaving, Carabino. You know, I'm out of here. So come on. Then I looked over and I saw the 3 hostages. They had been moved to a hut, and I could see them. And I thought that was a good sign that he was going to dump them on me. And that's what I wanted. And I said, Carabino, I got to go. And I stood up. It was a gamble. And I started walking. Okay, it's got to be a new Jeep. Done. I left, and we were having a victory press conference in Geneva with the Red Cross. The president of the Red, Conrado Samaruga, his name was, very distinguished guy. And I had to tell him about the Jeep. But we come and we got all the presses there, and I let it, and then I said, Samaruga, you announce the agreement. You get up. So he got up, and we, the Red Cross workers have been freed. He barely mentioned me. Of course, I then went up, and I did mention myself. And then as we were leaving, I said, Mr. President, you got to give him a Jeep. He said, well, a Jeep? Yeah, you got to give him a Jeep. And you got to give him these medical surveys. I made the deal. And the press came over to him to get more comments. And I said, and you can tell him, you can tell the press. And Samaruga, he smiled at me. And they got the Jeep. Anyway, so that's that story.
Yeah. What time for one more question, I'm told. Over here. Stand by for the mic, just up here.
Have you ever made a promise you couldn't keep?
Kevin?
Pay me my bonus.
You know, on these negotiations, one of the things that I've tried to do with my book publisher, Rodale, they're very good. And you know, the Kevin, I give full credit, and I take him everywhere because I think this book wouldn't have happened without him. But you know, in this negotiation, I said, all right, well, I want a little budget for Kevin, so that he travels with me when we do these road shows. And they said, fine, okay. But what I didn't understand is what Rodale did is they took the travel budget out of his cut of the proceeds. Anyway, it was a promise that I never made, but I'm going to try to, you know.
They're asking you about Katrina.
Is there a promise I couldn't keep? No, I think I kept them all. I mentioned the Clinton, you know, when I didn't endorse Hillary, we never made promises to each other. And people say, well, did Obama offer you something when you got, no, it wasn't. It was like just a talk. And the Clintons never did. They never said, okay, you're going to be this if you get the endorsement. No. We had a good relationship with the president. We were friends for years. I guess it's not a question of a promise I didn't keep. It was a mistake that I made. And also with the Cubans, I had said to the Cubans, you know, I'll stay here and negotiate in good faith. And when I went to the press, I won't say it was in bad faith, but it was a mistake. I should have just cooled down and shut up. You know, when you're a politician, the worst time to make a public statement is right after an election, because you've got all this emotion. And spouses, by the way, they're the ones that, they're the worst. I mean, they have so much passion. And I remember my wife, Barbara, who's been my partner in all these battles, she'd say to me, well, I saw you having breakfast with our opponent 3 days after the election. What's wrong with you? Do you remember what he said about us? I said, well, Barbie, I need his vote. I mean, this is a primary. And so that was, so that Clinton, I guess, mistake is a promise perhaps that I should have handled better.
Well, we made a promise that this would be fun, and I think we came through. I want to thank Governor Richardson for these stories. We want to thank Kevin for helping capture them all. We want to thank all of you for coming, and most of all, I'd like to thank Milken Institute for hosting us all, and great start for our collaboration. Thank you very much.
And thank you all for a wonderful morning. Thank you. Governor will be in the corner. The books are available over there. Thank you.